Well, we'll get started then. So welcome to those of you that are watching. Thank you very much, Andy, for joining us. It's fantastic to have you here. Just a bit of an introduction for those of you that are either watching on the replay or watching live and haven't been on one of the webinars yet so far. This is the Why Social Enterprise Summit. My name is Kat Lecock. I'm the host of the summit and also the founder of Share Impact, where I help social entrepreneurs and ethical business owners measure and communicate their impact better. As I'm super passionate about helping the social enterprise sector, and that's where I sort of share my expertise and advice best, is by helping organisations actually think through their impact strategy and how they can communicate that better to their customers, shareholders, stakeholders, etc., funders as well. So really pleased. We're now on day 3 of the summit. We've already had 3 amazing guest experts joining us on 3 webinars, and we've still got a week and a half to go. So please do share this summit with others so that they can participate as well. Unfortunately, people do have to be signed up to actually get access to the recordings or the live webinars, so please do share that link with them. Today though, I'm really pleased that we've got Andy Daly from Social Enterprise UK. So welcome, Andy. Thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And we're going to be talking all about corporate partnerships and providing services and products to corporates as a social enterprise. And Andy is well placed to do this because he's responsible for corporate partnerships at Social Enterprise UK. So Andy, let's get straight into it. It'd be great if you could just give us a little bit of background about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll give you a very potted history of my career. I've got one of those typical weird and wonderful career change stories. So back in the day, I used to be a teacher. I taught English in a number of countries. I was running the teaching operations at a language school in Barcelona for quite a few years, which was very nice, lovely place, but started to think I'd like a little bit more purpose in my day-to-day work. Came back to the UK, went back to school actually in my mid-30s. So I went to the LSE and did a master's in international development, which was great, really good introduction to the sort of third sector or blurred sector or whatever you want to call it. And found my way to social enterprise. And I must mention a program I did in 2012 called On Purpose, which is a fantastic 12-month leadership program for people who are transitioning from other sectors into the sort of purpose-driven organisations, and especially social enterprise. So On Purpose, they operate in London, Paris and Berlin now. Fantastic programme. Since then I've worked in quite a few social enterprises, big and small. I've also worked in social enterprise intermediaries, I suppose you could call them. So I worked at School for Social Entrepreneurs for a while. I worked at Unlimited, which is the biggest foundation here in the UK for social entrepreneurs. And now I'm at Social Enterprise UK. And I can talk a little bit about what SE UK does, probably. Would that be useful, Kat?
Yeah, and if you want to go into your slides and then we'll come back and have some questions and discussion afterwards, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, sure. Well, So the thing on Social Enterprise UK, I think we do about 5 things. I've got a slide on this, but let's come back to the slides in a moment. I think we do about 5 things. I'm going to look at my list here. We run campaigns to raise the profile of social enterprise more generally. I actually brought a prop. I don't know how well you can see this, but one of our campaigns is called Buy Social. Yeah. And this is on most of my jackets. If you work at SE UK, you have to wear that when you walk around. So the Buy Social campaign, it's partly aiming at the corporate market, which I'll talk a lot about today, but it's also very consumer facing as well. So lots of consumer facing social enterprises out there, of course. So just to give an example, there's something called Social Saturday, where for one day, it's actually a week now because it's expanded so much, but for 1 week in October every year, social enterprises up and down the country open their doors, make big effort to get out and talk to consumers and just raise awareness. And we support lots and lots of social enterprises to do that. So we've got the campaigns, we build networks between social enterprises that are working in similar fields for sharing knowledge and learning. We lobby government, policymakers, central government, local government, other public elected officials on behalf of social enterprises. So we actually sort of have a say in legislation that helps social enterprises. So the Social Value Act is a big piece of legislation in the UK, which SE UK helped to write. I'll talk a little bit about that later on. We work with corporate partners to broker business for social enterprises to help them scale up, and that's what I can talk a lot about today. And research as well, it's the other big piece that we do. So we carry out research to sort of represent the scale and the makeup of the UK's social enterprise market. And I've just got one bit on our research actually here. I'm just going to look at the numbers again. So quite often there's a figure of 70,000 quoted. So a lot of people over the years have said there are about 70,000 social enterprises contributing about 24 billion to the economy. Yeah. And that was one of the figures that we used, but we've redone the research. We've looked at our methodology again and reviewed that. And our latest research shows that it's actually closer to 100,000. Yeah. So the number that we're using now, and would encourage everyone else to use, is there are about 100,000 social enterprises contributing about 60 billion pounds to the UK economy. And to put that in context, it's about 5% of UK employment, actually, when you look at how many people are employed at those social enterprises. So, so that research piece, I think, is really important, just to sort of spread the word about social enterprise and show that it's growing and it's a significant part of the UK economy.
Absolutely.
So,
and has that growth's presumably been faster over the last 5 to 10 years? Would that be correct to say?
It's very fast. Yeah, absolutely. It's very fast at the moment. So I think if you compare sort of mainstream startups with social enterprise startups, I think the social enterprises are 3 times more than mainstream at the moment. So many people want to start up social enterprises. The number has also increased because of a methodology tweak. And if you're a geek and you want to know that, then the full report is called The Hidden Revolution. But we realized that we'd only really previously been looking at small and medium social enterprises and not the larger ones. So yeah, The Hidden Revolution is the name of the report. It's on our website, and you can have a look at the methodology there as well. But it's definitely a growing sector. It's a growing opportunity for corporates as well, really.
No, definitely, and we'll share that the Hidden Revolution report because we're putting together kind of a guide after the webinars to kind of capture all the different resources and information that people have talked about. So we'll definitely add that in. I think that'll be really, really helpful for some people. Okay.
Great.
Really great introduction, Andy. Thank you. For those people, because I said before that we don't necessarily have everybody here is not from the UK, so it's really helpful to kind of understand the context in which SE UK is working. But can I just ask as well, to what extent are you working internationally? Because I know you do work internationally with stakeholders and partners and stuff. But for those that are watching internationally, what kind of role do you play internationally in that sense?
Yes, I mean that has grown over the years. I mean, as the name suggests, our main focus is the UK, but we build we build networks and partnerships with similar bodies in other countries. So it's very likely that there is a version of Social Enterprise UK in whatever country you are, and if there isn't, we can actually help people on the ground to start that up. The Social Enterprise World Forum is something that we're very heavily involved in, of course, as well, and that sort of moves around from place to place. It was in Edinburgh this year, but it will be in Ethiopia next time around. But yeah, we're definitely looking to support the wider international movement as much as we can.
And I was at the Social Enterprise World Forum this year in Edinburgh, and it was brilliant, and I highly recommend if anybody can get to Ethiopia or they're in Ethiopia or in Africa, then definitely try and get there next October because it was just brilliant. Okay, Andy, I know you've prepared some slides. It'd be great if you want to sort of talk through some of those around what you do in terms of the corporate partnerships and the Bisocial campaign, and then we'll come back and ask some questions at the end.
Okay, right. I'm just sharing. Hopefully this will work.
Yeah, it's coming up.
You should now see my slides.
Fantastic.
So corporate supply chains, why and how they're engaging with social enterprises. So obviously the name of the summit is Why Social Enterprise. I actually saw Rianne, one of the speakers, on day one when she talked about her moment of discovering social enterprises. She said, why isn't everybody buying from social enterprises? Which, which I think is a great question to ask, and let's hope that we can get towards that. But I'm specifically looking at why are not all corporates buying from social enterprises, and why more of them are doing it, and how we can encourage more to do it, and how they actually do it as well. So, you know, if you're on the social enterprise side, what are the things you need to know if you want to tap into that market? And it's not for everybody, because our estimates show about 20% of the social enterprises out there are B2B, so business to business, but you know, it's still a significant opportunity for lots of social enterprises. So if I skip that one, I've already talked about who we are. So the first thing I thought it'd be useful to look at is what are the main drivers and barriers behind corporates actually even looking at social enterprise suppliers, and why this is important. I think if you look at, I mean, from our sector, I suppose it's interesting to compare this with CSR. And if you look at the FTSE 100, I did have this number written down somewhere, I've lost it now, but I think a typical FTSE 100 company, so the top 100 companies in the UK, their CSR footprint is about £10 million. And then if you look at that same company and their procurement spend, of course, it runs into the billions. So tapping into where they're actually spending their money anyway is a big opportunity for social enterprises. If we look at the drivers on the left-hand side, first of all, it's worth looking at each of these one by one. Of course, there's a rising focus on sustainability and responsible business. I think we can all feel that. I think we all feel that a lot of people are looking at capitalism and saying, is it working? Not optimally. Businesses create a lot of value, but does everyone get to share in the spoils of that? So I think there are a lot of people looking at sustainability and responsible business, and lots of businesses are now looking at this, and it might be how they can become more environmentally friendly, might be how they employ people, but it's also through their supply chains. So I always think of any business as doing three things, basically. They employ people, they deliver goods and services, and they buy stuff. So this is obviously looking at how they buy stuff, but I think more and more businesses are looking at how they can do that with a positive impact on society. So it's part of that. Diversity. So the diversity angle is obviously huge. It's a big part of that sustainability agenda. And social enterprise leadership teams, again, I've got the numbers here somewhere seamlessly on a piece of paper. If you look at social enterprises and compare them with sort of mainstream companies, the leadership teams are more diverse. So 89% of social enterprises have a woman on their leadership team, 36% have a disabled director, 34% include a leader from a Black or ethnic minority background. So if you include these social enterprises in your supply chains, you're actually doing a lot on diversity anyway. Recruitment and retention of talent. More and more people talk about the millennial effect. Of course, more and more people are asking, what kind of business am I working at? What kind of business do I want to work at? So if you want to make sure that talent is coming to you and staying there, you have to be able to show that you're promoting responsible business throughout your organization. Very similar piece on consumers. So consumers are obviously more interested in the brands that they're looking at, and what are you doing for society? What are you doing for the environment? The Social Value Act, I referred to that earlier. So that's a piece of legislation that came in 2013 in the UK. And that piece of legislation basically says that all public sector commissioners have to consider social and environmental and economic value when they're buying services. So that's public sector, so central government, local government, National Health Service, etc., etc. But there's a drip down effect, of course, because a lot of the large corporates that we work with, they're selling into the public sector. So the public sector wants social value in their services, and then any business that's delivering those has to show social value as well in the way in their supply chains and in the way they operate. A source of innovation. So lots of our corporate partners look at social enterprises as being particularly innovative and flexible suppliers. So one metric that we often quote in our research is how many businesses have introduced a new product or service in the last 12 months. Amongst mainstream SMEs, it's 33%, and in social enterprises, it's 50%. So a lot of these suppliers, a lot of these social enterprise suppliers, when they come into the big corporates, they do bring innovative ways of working and innovation. And that last one at the bottom there. So I think that this whole piece of work around supply chains and social enterprises, it's an opportunity for procurement folk to be more strategic and play a more strategic role. And in some ways, procurement's often seen as quite unsexy. It's quite, boring and traditional, and you've got to cut costs and just do the right thing. But this is an exciting opportunity to really drive some social value and some innovative value, and tick all of those other boxes there. And let's not forget that these procurement folk, they're humans. They just want to have purpose and meaning in their jobs as well. So those are the drivers, and you'll notice I've got more drivers than barriers, and you might say, woohoo, that's good news. But actually, I think a couple of those barriers are really big and quite significant. So it's worth looking at those as well. So I can see a little bit, but not all of it because of my face and your face, Kat. But I think I can remember what I wrote on that.
You can probably move your face as well.
Let's see if I can move our faces. Oh, gosh. Bear with me. No, it's not a plain ball. Is it plain ball? Yes. Okay, I've just moved it. So perception that compromises were made on quality and or value for money. So there is this perception that social enterprises sometimes, often don't deliver the same quality, value for money. They're more expensive than other suppliers. It's sometimes a perception issue. It's sometimes real, of course, but a lot of the challenges that we face are around trying to persuade these corporate buyers that doesn't have to be the case. And there are loads of fantastic social enterprises out there if you make an effort to find them. But there's that perception barrier. And sometimes people, of course, think, oh, they're charities. They're not really trading businesses. So again, we need to help these corporate buyers to get over the perception barrier. I've sort of talked about this already. Procurement traditionally has tended towards supplier consolidation. So it's typically about using fewer suppliers, bigger suppliers to cut costs, especially in the short term. And, that's a big barrier. There's a lot of research out there that shows that that's becoming less of a priority for procurement, but it's still there. And of course, there's a big danger. I always think about the Carillion collapse, when huge company in the UK, which was delivering so many services and things to government, and they were huge and often trusted because they were huge, and in the end they collapsed. So we say big doesn't always mean better. Lack of understanding of social value I think that's a very broad issue, which we could probably talk about all day, but how you define social value can be quite tricky. I think within the social enterprise world, we struggle with it a little bit as well. And then corporate buyers will often say that as well. What is this? What am I getting? How can you help me to quantify this? A lot of the social enterprises that we bring into corporate supply chains are around employment. Very typical model is a social enterprise which employs people who are distant from the labour market, and jobs for people who are facing barriers to work. I think that's a fairly clear one, but that's not the only model, of course. But that can be a barrier if a procurement team sees the financial value, but they don't always understand the social value.
Yeah.
And the final point there, there's no getting away from the fact that the number of social enterprises out there is growing, but not yet at sufficient scale to really meet all the needs of the corporate market. So we do often have one of our corporate partners asking for a social enterprise which delivers product X in location Y, and the supplier just isn't there sometimes. So that also is a barrier to scaling things up a little bit sometimes.
Yeah. So
drivers and barriers, right. I'm just waiting to see if Kat has any questions. But
I was just going to say on that, it's really, really interesting. So I had a social, well, I still have social enterprise with a friend of mine. She's now chief exec, and it's actually delivers an education program in secondary schools, but is a service to corporates through the mentoring and training development that they get predominantly for their staff. There's other reasons why they participate as well. But all of those drivers and barriers remind me of like some of the opportunities and the challenges that we faced in kind of pitching to corporates at the very start, but also even now. And particularly, you know, trying to get, because of the type of work we do, trying to change their understanding that we're absolutely not a charity. We're not interested in sponsorship. We're, you know, selling a particular service for as an opportunity for their business, which is in a very niche and different type of area for their CSR, really, and their staff development, not necessarily in their traditional procurement structures. But it's been really fascinating having that conversation and educating the corporates that we do work with around what social entrepreneurship is, and essentially, you know, encouraging them to also think about social entrepreneurship in their supply chain for all sorts of other services as well, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great when some of these large corporations marry up different initiatives to try and tackle the same issue. And, you know, a lot of the time we'll see our corporate partners which are buying from social enterprises and then also, mentoring, you know, some of the leaders at those same social enterprises. We think that's brilliant when it's a sort of joined up approach. But yeah, I mean, the way that, I'm not sure if this is on a later slide actually, but it's worth talking about now. But the way that we've engaged with a lot of our corporate partners, it is sometimes through CSR initially. So our primary contact may well be CSR, but we only really get traction here when it's CSR and procurement and the real business that are married up together. So if you can get both of them on board, then you can make a lot of traction, really.
Yeah.
So this next slide, I thought it might be useful to just talk about corporates with centralized procurement and corporates with devolved procurement, because we tend to look at these very big businesses and think that they're all quite similar in the way they buy, but this is actually one example of something that makes them very different. So I'll give you two examples, two companies here. So, and it's two companies that we're working with at SE UK. In terms of centralized procurement, so they're often professional services, multinationals, and an example there is Johnson & Johnson, where we've got a very active corporate procurement program in place. They have a very centralized procurement function, which controls a lot of what they spend. And on the opposite side, on the other side, we've got devolved procurement. And so this is often, so an example here would be construction companies, facilities management, and there's a fantastic company here in the UK called WATES, and that's WATES. And they're actually a family firm, but a very big one, and they're a construction company, but they have a very devolved procurement structure. And in a way, it makes sense because what they do is construction. They have lots, and I think they've got about 300 construction sites around the country at any given time. And a lot of things are bought at that local level. So that's the sort of more devolved side. But if we just look at the sort of different features of each model, on the centralized procurement side, so the good news is there are fewer buyers to influence. If you can get those few people in centralized procurement at Johnson & Johnson on board, then you know, the chances of them using your service or product are much higher. They tend to be larger contracts. So because it's centralized procurement, they will want to buy office supplies or catering or cleaning or whatever it is for the whole of their UK operations. And that means sometimes there are higher barriers to entry. If you can only serve one part of the market or your capacity is not quite up to their expectations, that might be a barrier to entry. It's usually national or even international delivery. So at Johnson & Johnson, we're working on their UK procurement, but very often they'll say, can these suppliers also do Belgium or Switzerland or South Africa? And, you know, we try to work with them on that. The other thing to say on centralized procurement is it's not always, in fact, quite often it isn't a direct relationship with Johnson & Johnson, for example. So they'll have major tier one providers who sort of work with them across lots of different spend categories. So with Johnson & Johnson, it's a company called Sodexo, who are an absolutely huge company. You might not have heard of them, but they do so many different things. And lots of social enterprises that work with J&J, and J&J is a company that we work with, and they do so many different things. And lots of social enterprises that work with J&J, and J&J is a company that we work with, and they do so many different things. And actually go through Sodexo. So that's the way. And Sodexo are great at working with J&J on their targets and stepping up and making that happen. But if you're coming at this from the social enterprise angle, it's not often a conversation with J&J. There'll be that intermediary there.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful.
Yeah. And then on the devolved side, so if you're working with a company like Waits, you've got many buyers to influence. So you've got those hundreds of different local construction sites. So it's not one phone call, not one relationship. You have to build more. But quite often smaller contract sizes because of that, and lower barriers to entry in some ways, because of the focus on local delivery. And that is quite often a direct relationship. So they won't have those huge tier one providers quite as much. So you can build your relationship with Waits. And I can't stress how, I mean, both companies actually, Johnson & Johnson and Waits, are real leaders in this field. They've been doing this for years. I remember hearing about Waits back in 2010, saying that they wanted to buy from social enterprises as often as possible. Yeah, some of those companies are making a lot of progress there and really delivering impact. So 2 different models of procurement. Now, it's probably worth looking at which spend areas are most promising for social enterprise suppliers. So I think, 3 comments. First of all, it is often products rather than services. It seems to be easier to get your food or beverage products into these corporate markets rather than services. And I think that's basically just because if you're producing high quality product, they will know that it's always going to be the same product. So again, it's something around that perception of risk that products seem ideally placed to tackle. That's not to say services don't work. They do very often, but products are sometimes even easier. Low risk, non-customer facing goods, services, gosh, that's difficult to say. So office supplies, it's not something that the end customer of Johnson & Johnson, for example, will ever see. So it's seen as low risk in some ways. So again, procurement, very interested in risk, minimizing risk. And this third point, in some ways, you might say it contradicts the first point, but labor intensive services are where social enterprises can really deliver impact anyway. So, and you might say that sometimes it's sort of like low skilled work, contract cleaning, maintenance, painting and decorating, that sort of thing. But those do seem sort of easy wins for the corporates, and that often happens. So that's a few ideas of where the spend areas are most promising. We've also been doing, so the bottom part of this slide is the part where I get quite excited because we've seen the gaps in the supply side. I talked about that a bit earlier on. And where the corporates are saying to us, we want a social enterprise that does this, but you're not able to find one. We're now looking at how we can sort of stimulate the market on the social enterprise supply side. So we commissioned an agency called Friendly Fires to carry out some research into this, and they talked to some of our corporate partners to find out where the gaps are. And it seems that event production, recycling, waste management, and scaffolding, actually very specific, are where the corporates are crying out for social enterprises. They really want to find more social enterprises that can do those. They do exist, certainly in recycling and waste management, and a little bit in event production, but scaffolding, I won't talk about scaffolding for too long, but I haven't been able to find scaffolding social enterprises, and we're asked that so often. So a bit of a call to action here. If anyone out there is interested in working with us on this, if you're a social entrepreneur, if you are a business and you're interested in switching your model to a social enterprise, if you're a social investor and you're interested in helping us to make this happen, then please do get in touch with us, because we want to fill these gaps. We want more social enterprises in these areas, and we want to build their capacity and their scale so that they can tap into these fantastic opportunities.
Definitely. No, I think that's really interesting as well, that those are the things that have come up. Yeah, particularly something so specific as scaffolding as well, which you might not necessarily think of, and presumably that's, the likes of Waits have had an impact on that particular part of the research as well. But that's really interesting that because I imagine lots of corporates have lots of contracts for upgrading buildings and facilities, and even, you need scaffolding just to do painting and decorating and things like that, don't you? So it's kind of finding those suppliers and easy wins. So yeah,
no, yeah, you're right. It's from weights and organisations like that, and actually, if we look at the corporate partners that we're working with on this piece, there are quite a few construction companies, so it's not only weights, and so I think that's, you're right, absolutely, Kat. It's one of the reasons we need scaffolding companies.
Excellent.
I thought it'd be interesting to look at a few case studies where social enterprises have been successful in getting into corporates. And I'm going to talk about 3 in particular who have all got into Johnson & Johnson's supply chains. I can just hear my voice echoing a little bit. I'm not sure why that is. It's not your end, is it, Kat?
No.
I'll press on.
We can't hear you, don't worry. I know it's annoying for you.
Good. Okay. So first case study here is a social enterprise based in Leeds in the north of England called Attigo, and they're a healthcare communications agency. And so one of the great things already there, if you think about Johnson & Johnson, is that they've got the sector specialization. So they know a lot about healthcare, life sciences, that kind of thing. It's their forte. So that's one thing that they've got in their favor. Their impact model is around employment. So they employ people with long-term health conditions, and that includes people with mental health issues. And the way they work there is they've got flexible and empathetic working arrangements to help those people to get into work and to stay there. And again, you can hopefully see a link there to Johnson & Johnson's core strategy, which is all about health and supporting people in their health. The really interesting thing about this case study, though, is that Attigo was set up, it's a sister company to another company called Mednet Group, which was already in existence and already very successful and already working with Johnson & Johnson. And what happened there was Johnson & Johnson were talking to Mednet Group about their desire to work with social enterprises. And so in a way worked with them to set up Attigo. So Johnson & Johnson sort of encouraged them and said, we really want to work with this sister company if you set it up. And that's how Attigo came about. And they're one of the most successful case studies now, one of the most successful social enterprises working with Johnson & Johnson. So that's an interesting model, I think, because the company exists thanks to the corporate buyer. The second case study I've got here is Inside Job Productions, which is a video production company based in London. They do internal and external video, so it's partly for external audience, but it's also partly internal J&J staff who see these videos. So it might be about products that they're doing, it might be about different strategies and campaigns that they're running. And especially if you think about that internal video, in some ways it's a low risk spend category. So I think that's an advantage there. Inside Job Productions originally was offering employment to ex-offenders and actually serving offenders on temporary release. And that was their impact model originally. And over time, they've actually pivoted their model a little bit to reflect the importance of their Johnson & Johnson relationship. So now they work more with people with mental health issues who are struggling to get into work as well. And then the other thing I think which has been such a success with Johnson, with Inside Job Productions, they've made an effort to be as visible as they can on site. So when they're filming, they will just be as visible as they can. They will run stalls around Johnson & Johnson to promote their work. They run training sessions for Johnson & Johnson employees who are interested in becoming filmmakers or just working out how to use a video camera. So I think that's helped to build a real presence and a real great reputation and a feel-good story, really, around the company. And the third and final one that I've got here is Wild Hearts. They're also supplying into Johnson & Johnson. They actually supply Deloitte, Barclays, Jaguar Land Rover, Zurich, all sorts of big companies. And one of the great things they've got going for them is their huge range of products and services. They originally started out doing office supplies, and they have over 35,000 products in their product range, but they also do IT hardware, printing, they do document storage, they do all kinds of things. So in some ways, Johnson & Johnson can, when they think, oh, we need to buy some of that, they can often just say to Wild Hearts, you do sell that, don't you? Okay, it's that huge range. one of the great things they do is that they run large events to drive engagement. So they run something called the Global Entrepreneurial Leaders Summit once a year, huge event. Lots of corporates go along there, lots of social entrepreneurs go there. And I think that really helps to sort of drive awareness of who they are and the work they're doing. And a little tip that Wild Hearts often give out is that they recognize procurement cycles are very long. And so when they're talking to corporate partners or potential partners, they will work hard to keep the leads warm, recognize that it might take years for a relationship to actually pay off and become a supply relationship, but they work hard on that. In terms of their impact, by the way, they have programs around employability skills for young people in the UK, but also very focused on the developing world and especially on tackling gender inequality and female entrepreneurship in countries like Malawi. So they're a great company. I could give lots more case studies about successful social enterprises if we've got time, but those are three that really always jump out for me.
Excellent.
And then just to sort of draw out a few lessons, if you're a social enterprise, how can you build those successful supply partnerships? So a few ideas here. And if you're looking at the corporate market, yes, each corporate is different. So I talked a bit about the centralized versus devolved procurement earlier, but also their core strategies will be very different. Johnson & Johnson will be very interested in healthcare. Waits are very interested in employment for young people. So it's very important to sort of target the right corporates and just, have a look at which ones are aligned with your particular impact model. Have a slide deck. Corporates love slide decks. Have a brief slide deck summarizing your offer to the corporates. So I think that's quite an important thing to just have up your sleeve, and they'll want it immediately as soon as you've had a conversation. Network. Of course, that's very important. And it's very important to break out of the social enterprise bubble. We all talk to each other a lot, and that's very nice. But these procurement folk at the corporates don't necessarily hang out at the same social enterprise events and forums that we do. So find out if you can go to procurement events, and if you just find out where your target market, what their industry events are, what's their national industry conference, for example. I talked a bit earlier about tier one providers. So when you're working with Johnson & Johnson, you'll have to build a relationship with Sodexo. And one of the great things there, of course, is if you build a relationship with Sodexo will be working with lots of other corporates, but be prepared for that you'll have to engage with those big providers. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't promote SE UK here. Become a member of SE UK or your nearest similar network. If you're in the UK, by the way, and you're a social enterprise, and if your turnover is below 100K, it's actually free now to become a member. So I just thought it'd be useful to flag that up. And if you're a member of SE UK, there are all sorts of benefits. The one that I can talk about most of all is about how we can, especially if you're in the B2B market, how we can introduce you to the corporate market, which is where my next slide comes in. I think this is my last slide, actually. So the Buy Social Corporate Challenge, it's the world's largest social procurement initiative. And the target there is to get corporates to buy, to spend £1 billion with social enterprises. And it's very successful. It's been running for about 2 years, and we're on our way. But I suppose this slide is more aimed at any corporates that might be listening, and it's a sort of breakdown of what you get for your fee, your membership fee. So we'll do a diagnostic for each of these corporate partners to understand where the gaps are, where the opportunities are. And whenever we do this with a new corporate partner, they always have social enterprises already in their supply chains, but are not always aware of it. So that's a great starting point. We will go into the companies to run training for key procurement and category leads. We'll do the brokerage, so that's recommending suppliers where those gaps and opportunities are. We run meet the supplier events as well, where we bring social enterprises in for the corporate buyers to meet. The partners, we've got 16 corporate partners now on board. It started with 7, so we've ramped up to 16, which is great. We bring the 16 corporate partners together on a quarterly basis to share learnings and successes. We work on the comms piece internally and externally. These are big organizations. You do have to sometimes influence quite a few people, and external comms is all about just sort of sharing the successes and celebrating the successes and hopefully inspiring others to get on board. And our annual impact report is a big part of that as well, showing how much these big corporates are spending and some of the impact behind that. There's a few company names down in the corner there. That's not actually all of them because we've had some joining so recently. But as I said, it started with 7 and now we've got 16. So it's great to see the momentum that's building there.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, they're interested in all sorts of different sort of social enterprises across their supply chain in those different like priority areas that you talked about earlier, but also in those gaps as well, where they're just not finding suppliers.
Yeah. I mean, I talked about that a little bit before, didn't I? About what kinds of spend areas there are: food and beverage, office supplies, contract cleaning. A lot of it is around facilities management. So helping to run an office building. All of these corporate partners have a big office or several big offices. So cleaning, painting, decorating, construction, scaffolding is the one that's the gap. But yeah, there's so many different areas: events, merchandise, corporate gifts. I do have a full list somewhere which I could certainly share. but yeah, there's lots and lots of opportunities there.
And you should have asked this at the beginning, really, but in terms of when you're talking about corporates and those sort of 16 that you've got on board so far, are they generally part of that FTSE 100 or FTSE 350? Are they those big corporates, or, you know, because there's obviously a huge middle area, isn't there, of large, medium to large corporates as well that social enterprises combine to, and actually if they're relatively small and new, it might be easier at first step to demonstrate the impact that they can have there.
Yeah, we don't have a hard and fast rule on how big they need to be in terms of their turnover or employee size or anything like that. It's usually, I mean, we never rule anything out. We're in the happy position where often the new partners come to us. We don't have to go out and do a hard sell. And if you look at the sorts of names down in the corner there, you'll probably recognize a lot of them. So a lot of them are pretty decent size. But actually not all of them. I mean, Linklaters are a fairly small company in some ways compared to the others. So it doesn't always have to be that huge FTSE 100 company. Some of them clearly are. But yeah, I'm trying to see if there's a link between them. There's quite a few construction companies, as I said.
Yeah.
So construction companies are really interested in social value. So the Social Value Act is a big driver, as I said. And just to come back to weights, I mean, it's great that this happened, but the Social Value Act that came in a few years ago has actually helped weights to win part of the contract to do the refurbishment of the Houses of Parliament. So that's central government, spending its money in a really socially impactful way, I think, with weights, knowing that weights work with lots of social enterprises. So construction's a big driver. I think with banks and certain professional services firms, there's a desire to sort of improve their corporate image. Since the financial crash, I think people have started to look at banks and ask a few more questions of them. Johnson & Johnson, yes, sometimes people look at pharmaceutical companies and ask tough questions, but actually sometimes these companies have got long-standing sort of corporate responsibility commitments that precede any of this. So in the case of Johnson & Johnson, they've got something called the Credo, which is about 3 or 4 paragraphs long, and it's whenever you walk into a Johnson & Johnson office, you see this in huge letters, and it spells out, and it goes back to 1943, I think, where it spells out their commitment to their customers, to their employees, but also crucially to their communities, the communities they work in. So a lot of the conversations I have at Johnson & Johnson do link back to the Credo. Yes, we should be doing this. It's the right thing to do. It's who we are. It fits in with our Credo. And that's true of a lot of these companies, actually, something similar to that.
Sure, and I'll come. We've got some questions coming in, so if anybody else who's watching has got questions, then please post those, and we'll come to those in a minute. I've just got a few questions of my own, and then we'll get to those as well. I was interested in what you're saying about your target to get, as part of the Buy Social campaign, corporate spending £1 billion. Can I ask where you are at the moment, because you're only 2 years in?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, our year 3 impact report will be coming out in a few months' time. So we're closer to 3 years than 2 years now. But I've actually, just bear with me, because I've got our impact reports here. They're available on our website.
I will share that as well.
They're on our website. Right. So we knew all along that in a way it would sort of go like that. So you start with a sort of with a slow growth, and then you hope that as more partners get involved, that growth will sort of speed up. So after the first year, it was 19.8 million.
Wow.
So that was the first year. And the second year was up to 45.3 million. So we're still, according to that, we're still not through the 100 million mark, but I think we will be at the end of year 3. And as I said, hopefully we'll push on and get more partners involved. We've got 16 corporate partners at the moment, and we're hoping to get somewhere between 25 and 30 in the next year or so.
Fantastic.
I'm a bit nervous about saying that, because it's partly my role to do that. But yeah, 25 would be a good number.
You're aiming high, haven't you? So you've got to set those goals for yourself. When you publicly announce them, they're more likely to happen, because you've put that pressure on yourself.
Yeah,
and that sounds fantastic. I mean, that is still an incredible and significant spend that probably wasn't being reported on previously. At least we now, like you were saying, many of those companies will have already had some engagement and will have been buying from some social enterprises, but not really aware of it. So if nothing else, it's kind of recognising that fact. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, there are hundreds of social enterprises that have benefited here, and I'm also looking at the figures again in the impact report. The average spend per social enterprise is 318,000, but some of them are actually very small local community organisations, where just a contract of a few £1,000s really helps them in their sustainability. The other thing to say here is 329 direct or indirect jobs have been created. And one thing that I always say, so again, this is about that perception thing. According to our research, 100% of corporate buyers think that social enterprises are delivering at the same or better quality. So it's an interesting point here, where I think there are a lot of corporates out there who might not join the Buy Social Corporate Challenge, or they might not have done yet, and they've got that perception issue, wondering how good the quality is from social enterprises. But once they're on board here, and once we've helped them to find some of the really high quality ones, the satisfaction rate is very high. It's 100%. So we're really pleased with that.
Brilliant. All right, I'm going to go to one question. So Duncan has asked a question. So he says, thanks for the really interesting information. I agree with your point regarding CSR, i.e. not just talking to CSR managers, but also speaking to the procurement managers. For social enterprises, the concept of supply chains can be daunting. What's the best starting point for trying to see where the social enterprise might fit?
Okay, let's go back to my previous slide. In terms of where you fit, I've talked a bit about the centralized versus devolved procurement. So depending on what product or service you're offering, just have a think about that. That's a good starting point. Is it a service or product that you think could be rolled out across a nationwide company? So just to give a few examples there of companies that are they can very easily work across the whole of the country. So it's often products. So Bellu Water is a great enterprise that are actually doing great work in the consumer market and in lots of restaurants and cafes as well. And they can obviously supply somebody in the north of Scotland as easily as they can supply someone in the south of England. So there's an example of a product. Clarity is a fantastic social enterprise which makes soap In fact, they're England's oldest social enterprise. They've been around since 1840 something. But again, if you're Clarity and you do soap, you can deliver that anywhere around the whole country. And they do all sorts of soap and cleaning products and that kind of thing. On that specific issue, Clarity actually, I talked about tier one providers and how it's not always a direct relationship. With Clarity, it's actually a level below that. So they first of all have to go through a distributor who then, I think they're called Bunzl, and then they supply into ISS, for example, or Sodexo, and then, of course, the ultimate client is the corporate. But again, if it's products, you can target the whole of the country, I suppose. And if what you're doing is a more local service, so if you've got people going out and doing painting and decorating or doing maintenance or doing cleaning, of course, you'll be looking at the more devolved procurement style. So construction companies, facilities management companies are really good there. But how to do that approach? I'm looking at that third line on my slide there, network, and I actually know that Clarity. So a good friend of mine, Camilla, who works at Clarity, I'm sure she won't mind me mentioning her name. So she launched the Soap Co, which is a new product range within Clarity. She's out every evening, from what I can see, at different events, meeting corporate buyers, and as I said, you need to get out of the SE bubble, get outside that, and find out where these buyers hang out. Once you've seen your industry, where's their national conference? Who do you know, or directly or indirectly, who might be able to make introductions there? Yeah, and
I would absolutely add to that, because and it's being willing to speak to absolutely everybody you meet about what you do, and having a very clear message about what it is you offer, like the specifics, but also the value that you add. Because we got 2 or 3 sales pitch opportunities from literally my colleague Jen on the train, because we used to travel around we still travel around the UK a lot to deliver our programs, but having conversations with people that she sat next to on the trains, realizing that they've operated and worked in the sectors that we were targeting, and Jen's brilliant at this anyway, but having that rapport with them, and the ability and the confidence to just ask for, well, do you know somebody who I can speak to in your company? Because I'd really like the opportunity to have, to go and speak to them about whether this would be a good fit for them. And we secured 3 sales pitches from that too, I think, which were successful. And so it is really being prepared as well to have those conversations with literally anybody, even at this sounds really silly, but actually happens at family parties, any new events you're going to. So there's the really strategic stuff about going to those places, trade shows and conferences, which we absolutely did as well. But actually being willing and open to talk about this generally with everybody you meet, because the reality is people are working in all sorts of different sectors and different areas, and may well have the contact that you need to speak to. So although they may not be the right person, they may well be able to have somebody, and I think the other great tool these days online is LinkedIn as well. And we've used that hugely to build our own network and connect with people. Hence how I found you was through somebody else that connected me to you, Andy. So that's, don't underestimate that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the human connection, I think, because yes, procurement teams and getting through the door, it can be difficult. You can go to their websites and fill in, their online forms. We would like to be a supplier. But really, if you meet a real human being at an event and you get a chance to talk about what you do, and if you've got your elevator pitch honed and follow up with a slide deck or whatever leaflet you've got, I think that makes a big difference. And then people can sort of try to work around any different procurement rules and processes they've got.
Yeah, definitely. There's one more question then here.
Sure.
From Eddie, which says, in terms of raising awareness of where to buy social, what's the challenge we should focus upon for raising awareness and generating interest? We're building maps of places that people can visit, and ones of the wider ecosystem too. Is there anything else?
I didn't quite catch the last part of that. So Eddie's building maps, is that?
Building maps of places that people can visit, presumably during Social Saturday and Social Week. But is there other things that we should be focusing on as a sector to kind of raise awareness?
Um, Gosh, yeah, it's a real challenge, isn't it? And it comes out of that social enterprise bubble again, isn't it? Because if you're not careful, you're preaching to the converted, you're talking to the people that already know. Um, I just think whatever you can do to literally, I'll get the badge out again. Whatever you can do to literally sort of, just wear the badge in a visible way. Um, so, gosh, I mean, I'll give an example. The building that SEUK is in London, it's near London Bridge. We've got School for Social Entrepreneurs on the second floor, just below us. But on the ground floor, we've got a fantastic restaurant called Brigade, which helps homeless young people to train up as chefs and to work in the kitchens there. And when you walk into Brigade, they've got their mission and their messaging very clearly on the wall. So if you happen to just walk in there without knowing who they are, you'll know it by the time you've walked out. They talk about how they help homeless people. So if you are a consumer-facing business, be bold, tell people about it, put it on your napkins, put it on your wall, put it on whatever you think customers might see. We're encouraging lots of social enterprises to put the Buy Social badge on their products. So you'll now see that badge on Clarity Soap, on Bellu water bottles, and lots of those places. Yeah, I think that as a sector, we need to just collaborate a little bit more. And where we do have networks, let's work together on these campaigns. So I think the Buy Social campaign is doing reasonably well in some ways, but we'd love to talk to other people who want to get on board and help us to amplify that.
Brilliant. Yeah, so I encourage both Eddie and Duncan to get in contact with you. Maybe we can link you up afterwards.
Absolutely, that'd be great. Sure.
Duncan's also posted that he was asking in regards to a range of products because he's actually the voluntary director of the Irish Social Enterprise Network, which supports a range of social enterprises. So they're having a lot of discussion in Ireland, he's saying, about public procurement, but it's not so much discussion yet about corporate supply chain. So I think, again, it'd be really useful to connect with you, Andy, and connect with others on this webinar around how they can do that more.
Absolutely.
Brilliant, a really good outcome today, if nothing else. Andy, we've just got a few more minutes left. I've got a question in terms of, because there may well be, I know there are corporates who have signed up to this series, so they may not be here right now, but kind of watching on the replay and stuff. What are some of the things, yesterday we were talking to Cressy Wesling from Elvis and Cress, and this afternoon we're talking to Philip Ullman from the Cordon Group, and really looking forward to that because Philip's actually changed his family business into a social enterprise. I'm sure you'll be familiar with Philip. So that's going to be a really interesting thing.
Yeah.
Where are you personally, or SEUK, sort of sat in terms of lots of the social enterprises I speak to, and the likes of Philip, wanting to create a really radical shift? And we're still very much at the very early stages, even when we've got organisations, companies like Clarity that have been around for 100 or so years, more than that. I think we're still very much at that early adoption phase of social entrepreneurship, aren't we? And radical new ways of thinking, different ways of thinking about how we deliver and run businesses. And we're talking on Monday with Erinch from the World Fair Trade Organisation about not being too prescriptive at this stage, or ever really, but actually just redesigning what business should be about, and that all business should aim to be more socially and environmentally sustainable, and kind of thinking about our bigger vision of what world we're trying to create through the economy and through business. But I'm interested to sort of end on, for corporates, I think it's brilliant that we're moving, the work that Social Enterprise UK and others are doing in terms of getting corporates to at least, buy from social enterprises and help the sector grow and develop through bringing them into the supply chains. What influence do you see, though, that having on corporates changing their whole vision for the future? Is it just to kind of buy social, or is it to are you seeing influences and changes in the way they're actually running their businesses as a result, sort of the change in culture in terms of attitudes around social, economic and sustainable factors?
Gosh,
big question.
Yeah, that is a big question. Well, I mean, first thing to say is I think it's great you've got Philip speaking at 2 o'clock from the Cordant Group, and we're working with the Cordant Group to sort of help them to turn into a social enterprise. Huge company, huge impact potentially, and so that's really exciting. And we want more companies to do that and to follow Cordant's example, and we're always really open to that conversation. But in terms of, so the impact of the corporate supply chain, I think that's what you were asking, how that might spread around broader corporate activity. I think in a way it's helping to shift corporates away from the traditional bolt-on CSR initiatives, which might not be so central to their operations. And you know, as I said, there's the money angle as well about how much goes on CSR and how much goes through procurement. So I think in some ways it's helping businesses to realize that social impact and social value, whatever you want to call it, it's not something that's an add-on. It's not something you do after you've done your main business. It's something you do right at the heart of your business.
Yeah.
Buying stuff, it's one of the central things that all businesses, big and small, do. So don't think of social value as an add-on or a nice to have. You know, if you buy social, then that will, you know, transform the way you're doing your core operations, I think.
Yeah, and that's definitely, I've been, you know, surprisingly, I suppose, because we all have those sort of generalizations and stereotypes of what corporates are like, but I've been really surprised, and I'm sure it's the case with particularly those 16 organisations that you've got on the Biosocial campaign. It's actually almost come from the leadership of those businesses. They know they need to be doing things differently to, you know, stand out in the market. And, you know, the leadership are wanting to embed good ethics, good values, commitments to the future. And so for me, it's been really exciting to see that shift. And not, you know, it's not across the board, but in those organisations that are making a decision about, no, we're embedding this through and through. Buying social is certainly one really practical, valuable way that we can make that shift. But there's all sorts of other things. And I know the organisations we've worked with, it's been really interesting to learn, you know, the changes they're going through as corporates around how they become more sustainable. How do they add more social value? Not because it's just making good business sense and it's what they're being asked to do from commissioners and things, but because they generally want to make that difference and they want to be better as businesses. And I think the buying social only just adds to that, and it's brilliant, and a real, like you said, all the way through today, a huge opportunity for social enterprises to capitalise on if they've got that opportunity to sell products and services.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Andy. It's been brilliant listening to your presentation and talking to you. We'll definitely see if we can link up with people that have been on live who wanted to ask you some further questions, I think.
Yeah, I'm really happy for any connections, and my contact details are there. So yeah,
we'll do that.
It'd be lovely to hear from others who joined as well.
Yeah, no, but thank you for your time. It's been fantastic, and we'll then definitely share those resources and the research and impact reports that you've mentioned as well.
Great.
Notes and things.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you for having me, and hope the rest of the summit goes well. And I'll definitely be tuning in to some of those. Philip should be great at 2 o'clock, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully see some of you there. Thanks, Andy. Speak to you soon.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone. Bye.